Happy Pride Month, happy June. This is finally the month where my queer focused book channel really gets its time to shine. Like June is my month. It's Pride Month. It's also Scoliosis Awareness Month, which is a fun fact because I am a scoliosis girl. There is nothing about me that is straight, including my spine. So June for me is just a month of celebrating myself and the queer community as a whole, obviously. I do tend to mostly focus on sapphic books on this channel because obviously being a lesbian woman, that is what I gravitate towards reading the most. But today I'm going to recommend you 10 LGBTQ plus books that I think you should read during Pride Month. You've got to read every single one of these books this month. That is my mission to you. You don't really, but it'd be cool if you did. If you're new around here, and I know a lot of you do find me through my queer book videos, hi, I'm Georgia. I talk about queer books. I also talk about not queer books. I talk about queer history and general queer life, and maybe you should join me over here. I've got a lot of big things planned for this channel, like hang around, it's gonna be fun. And with that, let's get into some recommendations because this first book I have for you is literally the best book that I read in 2023. This is Onda and Santi Were Here by Johnny Garzavia, and this is probably the most beautiful book I've ever read in my life. You know the saying, like, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, you can. You can judge this book because just look how gorgeous that cover is. The story inside is equally as gorgeous, and once you finish the book as well, like, this cover has even more meaning, and I adore it. So Onda and Santi is based in San Antonio in Texas, and our main characters are obviously Onda and Santi. Onda is a non-binary Mexican-American teen who is this incredibly talented artist, and they are basically working at their family's taqueria for the summer whilst basically getting ready to go to college where they're going to basically learn art and be an artist. Onda is somebody who is super passionate about their Mexican heritage, and all the art they make is sort of inspired by Mexico, inspired by their heritage. And then one day in the family's taqueria, Santi walks in and asks for a job, and immediately Onda is just obsessed with Santi. He is this gorgeous Mexican boy, and they begin a love affair despite everyone telling them not to, despite all of Onda's family warning him, like, do not get involved with Santi, you're only going to get your heart broken. Like, it's kind of like fated, like they were always going to end up together. But Santi's constantly pulling away, like he's not entirely there in the relationship until Onda finds out that Santi is undocumented and he is constantly at risk of being deported back to Mexico. And what follows is the most heartbreaking but romantic and most beautifully written book I've ever read in my entire life. I cried so much whilst reading this. It really just like hit me in my soul. Obviously, I'm from the UK, I'm not from America. I have no concept of what it's like to be a Mexican immigrant in America. But I feel like this book, it does such an, what's the word, like eloquent. It describes it so eloquently that I felt like I was there. I felt like I was living every single emotion that Onda and Santi go through, and oh my god, the amount of tears I cried whilst reading this book. Like, imagine being so deeply in love with somebody but knowing that at any moment they could be ripped away from you and you may never ever see them again. Like, even the thought of that just gives me goosebumps. It's horrible, and this book describes it in such a vivid way. Like, you know an author is really talented when they can make you feel such visceral joy and happiness. Like, my heart was literally full reading about the love between these two, but also having the ability to make you cry within a sentence. Like, that is true talented writing. I guess the best way to describe this book is it just feels so real. Like, if you told me this was non-fiction based on Johnny Garzavia's like own sort of past, I would have believed you. And one thing I will say about this book though is there is a lot of Spanish in it, which makes sense seeing as you were dealing with two Mexican teens. But there is a lot of Spanish. I've been teaching myself Spanish for like 5 years on and off, so I could get most of it, but there were some bits that I did have to Google, and it sort of sometimes took me out of it a little bit. And that might be because I'm British and like we don't learn Spanish as much as American people do. But that is literally the only slight negative I can say about it, which isn't even negative. Like, that's not even negative, it's just I don't know Spanish. That's it. After reading this, I really want to read just everything that Johnny Garzavia has ever written. The next book I want to recommend is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I love this cover. Like, I really, really enjoy this cover. I thought I was going to hate this book. I didn't read it for the longest time because everyone was talking about it. Like, I'm sure you've heard about this book before. I didn't pick it up because I do not do sci-fi. I don't like fantasy. I like books that are set in like the real world. So I really didn't have high hopes for this, and within like 20 pages I was so hooked. Again, just incredibly beautiful writing. And I suppose even though this is sci-fi, like it did feel real to me. Like Julia Armfield wrote about this story and what happened with such conviction that I was actually like, yeah, that's pretty believable. And like most of it is set in the real world. There's just like little bits which are a bit like sci-fi. Does that make sense? The main characters here are married couple Miri and Leah, and straight off the bat, one of the main things I loved about this going in is there was no explanation over the fact that this is a lesbian couple. There was no like, oh, these are all the traumas they had to go through before like being together, like not straight off the bat anyway. It was just like, okay, these are the main characters, lesbian couple. They didn't even say lesbian couple, they just said married couple. And I really loved that. So Leah's a marine biologist, or at least works in the ocean. She has to go down in a submarine every few months to the bottom of the ocean, where it's her job to basically research fish and stuff, I guess, ocean things. So on this one particular occasion, Leah goes down in the submarine to the bottom of the ocean, and she doesn't come back up. Like the submarine just like doesn't reappear. And Miri is stuck on the surface, not having a clue what's going on, because she's trying to get in contact with the company that Leah works for, and they're just kind of giving her nothing. Like, it's really, really dodgy. There's never really much explanation as to like why the company kind of like avoids telling Miri what's going on. This book just feels deeply uncomfortable. Again, it's just so visceral, like you can really feel what's going on. You as the reader, you do know that eventually Leah did surface from the submarine. She did come back up to Earth. But you don't really know what happened down there, and there's something very strange going on because Leah is literally just fading away in front of Miri's eyes. And that sounds like maybe a metaphor, but I mean it like quite literally. Like Leah is fading away, and Miri's kind of trying to deal with the fact that her wife was gone. Like she was gone, she was in a submarine. She made peace with the fact that Leah had probably died on the ocean floor. And then one day, Leah comes back up to surface, only she's a completely different person. She's obviously deeply, deeply traumatized. She's been through some things, and she's just not coming around. So Miri kind of has to go through that grieving process twice. Once when she thought she'd lost her, and the second time when she's there, but she's just not Leah anymore. Like, how would you deal with that in a relationship? And it's heartbreaking because this book talks about love in such a beautiful way. Like Miri really, really deeply loved Leah, but she doesn't know this version of her. There's this quote that I want to read you from page 51. The thing about Leah as I knew her was that every so often when I was pissed off and sitting on the sofa, she would grab my legs and start to pedal them, chanting Tour de France, until I laughed. The thing about Leah was that 9 times out of 10 she couldn't bring herself to be unkind by anyone, but then 3 times a year would say something so blisteringly cruel about someone we knew that she'd clap both hands to her mouth and turn in a circle as though warding off evil. At a point, perhaps 6 months after we first started seeing each other, she read a book in which a pair of lesbians emailed each other meaningful lines of poetry, and shortly after she asked if this was the sort of thing that we should be doing too. If you ever send me poetry, I texted her, I'll cut your tits off. And over the course of the next week and a half, she emailed me every poem from the complete works of Wilfred Owen, signing off every email with a winking face and heart. I think it just really captures that it's those small things that make you love a person, and you can't explain those things to anyone else. And this entire book just reads like that. I just adore this. Julia Armfield's actually got a new book coming out really soon, and I am so excited to read it. The next book I want to recommend you is actually non-fiction, and that is The Tragedy of Heterosexuality by Jane Ward. In this book, Jane Ward explores what has gone wrong with heterosexuality in the 21st century. Like, we all know the old trope of people getting married and then pretending that they hate their partner. Like, is it even pretend? The whole, like, ball and chain, or like, I hate my missus, let's go out and get away from the missus for a night. Like, that is such a thing in straight culture. But why? And then you compare that with lesbian couples, for example, and this is a stereotype, but I often find stereotypes are such for a reason. And lesbian couples are more often than not just obsessed with each other, like can't say a word against each other, like physical touch all the time, like completely inseparable. And they're the ones who are made fun of, not the heterosexual couples who pretend to hate each other. I am going to be honest with you, I did actually only give this 3 stars because whilst I think the premise of it is really, really interesting and Jane Ward makes some fantastic points, I do also think it loses its way a bit towards the end, and there's some points I was a bit like, it doesn't really make sense. But for like the overarching theme of the book, I do think it's really interesting and it is worth a listen. I listened to it via Audible, but I think maybe it's worth getting the actual physical copy of this, because then you can just kind of like skip to the next bit that's interesting, if that makes sense. I did also find this book really intersectional. Like, Jane Ward talks a lot about the experiences of people of colour and how that's different from white people, with trans women. Like, she really looks at it from all angles, and it is really interesting. There's also a really interesting chapter about allyship that put a lot of the thoughts and feelings I've been having recently into words. It focuses on how allyship a lot of the time is for the straight person and not for the gay person. It talks about how straight women talk about how like they have a gay best friend, or they want a gay best friend and they love their gays, but then they'll be threatened by a lesbian and they won't make that same effort with a lesbian. But like a white gay man, we love them. Lesbians, no. It's all like, yes, queen slay, until a lesbian approaches them, and then it's like, oh, you don't fancy me, do you? Like, you don't fancy me, like, stay away, like, we're different. And the way that Jane Ward just frames the entire book, I thought was really interesting, because she does it from like an angle of, I'm an ally to straight people. Like, I'm a straight ally. I'm like, I support you straight people, and here are all the things that we can do to make your lives better. Instead of like, she like centers homosexuality and others' heterosexuality. And it was just like nothing else I've ever read before. It was really interesting. It did have its problems, don't get me wrong, but I think overarching, I think it has some really good points. Moving on a little bit lighter perhaps, A Scatter of Light by Melinda Lowe. We all know how much I talk about Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe, and I was really nervous to read another book by her, because I was like, if it's not as good as Last Night at the Telegraph Club, I'll be so disappointed. No disappointment here. I just adored this book. There's something about Melinda Lowe's writing that I devour every single time. So in this book, our main character is Aria, and she has gone to spend the summer with her grandmother in California. Is California? Yes, it is California. As far as Aria is aware, she's always been straight, and then she meets her grandmother's gardener, female gardener, Steph Nichols, and she realises pretty quickly that that's not really the case. Like, she is definitely not straight. And something I adored about this book, and something that you don't actually see too often in sapphic books, and I'm hoping does come to change, is Steph is butch, and I love that because there's such little representation for that. Steph and her little group of like queer friends really quickly take Aria under their wing and sort of show her the queer community, the queer culture in California. They go down to San Francisco, they go to all these music festivals, they go to like queer parties, and it like hurt my heart because the things I would have done for that when I was a teenager, I think Aria's like 18 in this, that would have been such a pivotal, life-changing experience for me, and still now I really struggle to like infiltrate queer culture, which is why I talk about it so much online, because like I don't have many queer friends to talk to about this kind of stuff. And it's just really beautiful how Aria slowly comes to accept herself, accept her crush on Steph. Obviously, Steph's in a relationship, so it's not all that easy. Aria is inherently flawed, like the things that happen in this book are inherently flawed, but we're all humans at the end of the day. Like, we all make mistakes, things happen, and I don't think this book really shies away from the fact that mistakes do happen, but we move on from them. Also, Aria is Chinese American, and Melinda Lowe always writes about Chinese American characters. I feel like she can really like capture what it's like, because obviously it is a personal experience for her. And there's something in this book which links it to Last Night at the Telegraph Club, and when that page came up and I hadn't already made the connection, I don't know if I was supposed to have made the connection before, but I just didn't. But when I made the connection at the end of the book, I literally cried. Like, it wasn't even sad, I just cried because I was so excited. So if you like Last Night at the Telegraph Club, like, it's in the same universe. A lesbian classic that I can't believe took me so long to read, but now I have read it. I'm going to be telling all of you that you need to read this all the time. This is Ruby Fruit Jungle by Rita Mae Brown. I am going to preface this by saying this book was written in the 1970s, and there are certain aspects of it that very much read like this book was written in the 1970s. So you've got to go into this book with an open mind. There are things which are probably, definitely wildly offensive nowadays that you just wouldn't write about nowadays. But it was written in the 1970s, and you got to like have critical thinking when it comes to that and realise this was the lesbian experience at that time, in that era. Okay, saying that, let me tell you what it's about. This book is about a girl called Molly Bolt, and she is just this larger than life, really vibrant character, and you literally follow her in this story from when she's a toddler, and she knows from like being a toddler, from being so young, that she doesn't quite fit in with everyone else. She's always like this rebel, she's always kind of like an outcast, but like she will fight for herself. There's one thing about Molly, she will fight and she will like stand up for herself no matter what. Even in a time period like the 1950s, 1960s, I think, is this book set in the 50s? I think it starts in the 50s, but actually it might be wrong, but it starts somewhere in like the mid 20th century. Like even at that point in time when women weren't supposed to necessarily stick up for themselves, like Molly was doing it. So she was always different. You follow her through her childhood, through her teenage years. You follow her as she finds out that her parents like aren't really her parents, and that is why she's always been treated like not great by them, or at least not great by her mum. And then her dad dies really young, and they're like dirt poor, they don't have any money whatsoever, but Molly's this like super larger than life personality who's got these massive dreams. She wants to work in movies, and so she fights from like the bottom up to get herself into university so she can study to work in films. Or I think she goes into law first. I think she gets into like a law course at university first and then like moves into films. But she fights tooth and nail to get what she needs. And along the way, she's also discovering her sexuality. Throughout her teenage years, she's sleeping with boys, and she just like doesn't really have any feelings about it. And then she starts sleeping with girls, and she has a lot of feelings about that. Even when she's an adult, like Molly still dabbles in like men and women, but she still very much identifies as a lesbian throughout the 1960s and 1970s, when lesbian really would have been like quite taboo. Like even now, there are lesbians who don't like to use the word lesbian because they say it feels vulgar and it doesn't feel correct. Like Molly is out and proud, and it's really interesting how it very much challenges our modern idea of lesbian. Like you'll see people nowadays being like, lesbian is exclusive, you only sleep with women, you're not interested in men at all. And it's really interesting to read it from this perspective of like mid 20th century, where it wasn't quite as rigid as that. Like Molly did dabble with men, she didn't enjoy it, but she did if she had to, and she still identified as a lesbian, and nobody challenged it at that point in time. I don't really know where I stand on that. I haven't like thought about it really, but like I did find that really interesting. And this book is laugh out loud funny. Like I never laugh out loud at books. Like even if it is funny, like very rarely will you get more than like a from me. I was reading this on the plane home from New York in April, and I was literally having to like stifle my giggles because I didn't want to wake up people around me because it was like 3 a.m. Like I found this book so genuinely funny. Like Molly is just this wild character, this wild personality, and the things I would do to meet her in person. And she doesn't exist, but I wish she did. If you want something maybe a bit of an easier read, something a bit more YA, I can't recommend Every Time You Hear That Song by Jenna Voris enough. I got sent an early access of this book to read and review, and I enjoyed it so much. Our main character here is 17-year-old Darren, and she is a bisexual queen, and something I really enjoyed about this book, and it's something you don't see often in like bisexual media, is she actually fancies throughout the course of this book a man, which often with bisexual characters in sapphic books, they will end up with a woman because it is a sapphic book, but bisexual women are still sapphic even if they end up with a man, and I really like that about this book in particular. But that's not the main story here. The main story is that Darren is obsessed with a singer called Declan Castle, and Declan Castle has sadly recently died. And then it's announced at Declan's funeral that she has left behind a treasure hunt, and at the end is a time capsule with unreleased songs. And Darren decides that she needs to be the one to find these songs. Like this is her birthright, this is who she is, like she needs those songs. And along the way of going on this treasure hunt, she finds out a lot about herself and about Declan Castle as a person. But this book is dual point of view, so you've got Darren's story in the present searching for this time capsule, and then you go back to the 1970s where you are hearing Declan's version of events. You are learning about who Declan was and her life story, and it turns out that Declan also is not straight. And that is all I'm going to say on that. I just found this book a really light-hearted read, like really easy, and I would highly recommend it if you're looking for something maybe a little bit different. When You Call My Name by Tucker Shaw. I literally never hear anyone talk about this book, and I want to scream about it from the rooftops because I absolutely adored this. I was just browsing Gaze the Word in London on Marchmont Street one day last year. If you ever find yourself in London, I highly recommend you go and visit Gaze the Word. But I saw this cover in there, I turned it over, and it was literally like somebody had gone into my head and like found my like perfect intersection of interest and then wrote a book about it. This is set in 1990 New York City. You've got Adam and Ben. They are not romantically linked at all. Like, you are hearing about their stories completely parallel to each other. And they're going through their gay awakenings, but two kind of like very different gay awakenings. Like, Adam is falling in love for the first time whilst Ben is being kicked out of home. He has gone to New York City all alone and he's like trying to make it in the fashion scene, and he's trying to like make his career, but also like discovering queer culture alongside that. It's really heavy on like queer culture in New York City, which I just absolutely adore. Like, if you don't know, I literally got engaged at Stonewall in New York City because I'm that much of a New York City queer history nerd. Like, specifically New York City, I'm there, I'm all over it. As the boys are sort of diving headfirst into the queer community, they are discovering just how much of an impact HIV/AIDS has had on the people around them and just how much it's going to affect them. Tucker Shaw writes in the author's notes at the end, "When You Call My Name is fiction. It represents only the tiniest slither of the continuing experience of HIV/AIDS. None of its events happened in real life, not exactly. None of its characters existed in real life, not exactly. St. Hugh's Hospital, Dome Magazine, Sonia's Village Video, none of these places existed in real life, not exactly. But you exist in real life and I exist in real life, and that means hope exists in real life. Find it and hold it tightly because hope will grow in your grasp." I will continue talking about this book until everyone is talking about this book. Please, please read it. If you want a little bit of transgender rep, why don't you read Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar? This is a YA book and, again, just one that I absolutely adored. Felix is a transgender teenager who is just searching for love. Like, all Felix wants is love and to be loved. Only he is worried that he is a little bit too marginalised to quite get that. He's black, he's queer, he's transgender, like, he just always sort of feels like he fits on the edge of society, and he's not convinced that anyone is ever going to love him. That's only compounded when somebody starts sending Felix very abusive, threatening messages after posting his dead name on a public forum. This is a story of questioning, of self-discovering, of how to deal with bullying, how to make peace in yourself when other people can't make peace with you. I'm not going to lie to you, I read this book so long ago now that the details of it do escape me, but if you want a story about self-discovery, about love, about falling in love, about learning that you deserve love, this is beautiful. It's one that I've thought about ever since I first read it, and again, beautiful cover. Like, queer books always just have the most incredible covers. And the final book I want to recommend is a non-fiction one. I bet you can pause this and probably guess what I'm about to say if you've watched any of my queer book videos before. That is The Stonewall Reader by the New York Public Library. You thought I was going to do a queer book recommendations video and not talk about The Stonewall Reader? Really? Really? Of course I was going to. The Stonewall Reader is something a little bit different because it's an anthology. It is basically a compilation of stories of people who are there before, during and after Stonewall. It is historical. It is about the people who are there on the ground when these like historical events that we talk about all the time actually happened. Like, they were there, they saw it with their own eyes. And something that is so interesting about this book is, even though all these people were there on the same night and they all saw it, they've all got vastly different versions of the same event. And that just kind of encapsulates history, doesn't it? It's so interesting. You've got stories from Marsha P. Johnson, from Sylvia Rivera, from Ernestine Eckstein, all these people who are there, these massive, massive names that we hear about all the time, and now you can hear their stories in their own voices. I listened to the audiobook of this on Audible, and I would highly recommend that you do the same if you have the opportunity, because like the interviews are actually like the original interviews. Like, it's their voices telling these stories. In the book version, it's obviously just been transcribed, but I think there's really something to be said for like hearing it, hearing the emotions as they were. If you're a queer history nerd, or even if you're not a queer history nerd, if you're just generally queer, I cannot recommend this book enough. Like, I feel like it is so important to know our story, to know the stories of the people who came before us and paved the way for us to be open in this world today. Like, 60 years ago, could I have been living in a house that I own with my female fiance. Absolutely not. And we've got these people to thank for that. Like, these are the people who paved the way, who put themselves in danger to enable us to live this life today. And I feel like it's so important to know that and to honour that. And that is not to say that everything today is perfect. There is still such a long way to go when it comes to LGBTQ plus rights. But these people, they made a start when nobody else was, and it's our jobs, our responsibility to continue paving that road, to continue making new opportunities for the people who come after us, because there will be more queer generations after us, and we can make it better for them. And I just finished this book and I felt so ready to start my own revolution, to like make things happen for the people who are going to come after me. I have realised at the beginning of this video I said it was 10 books, but I've actually only talked about 9. But you know what? It's fine. It's still 9 books that you need to read this month. Every single one of them. Read them all. You have to. And before you go, please don't forget to leave a comment down below. Comment anything, it's really good for the algorithm, but maybe you should tell me what your favourite queer book is. Any genre of queer, you tell me in the comments and then we can talk about it. It can be like a little book club down below. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.